Millbrook looked like something straight out of a postcard. The kind of small town where kids still rode their bikes without helmets, where the local diner knew everyone's regular order, and where people left their doors unlocked at night. Main Street had that classic American charm with its brick buildings, hanging flower baskets, and a town square where farmers' markets happened every Saturday morning. But if you looked closer, really paid attention, you'd notice something off. You'd see how certain families never quite felt comfortable walking down those picture-perfect streets after dark. You'd notice how traffic stops seemed to happen more often in certain neighborhoods. You'd hear the whispers at church gatherings, the careful conversations that stopped when the wrong person walked by. Chief Robert Donovan had been running the Millbrook Police Department for 15 long years. He was a big man, the kind who filled a doorway with graying hair he kept military short and a face that seemed permanently set in a scowl. Around town, people called him old school if they supported him, or something much worse if they didn't. He ran his department like it was his personal kingdom, and everyone who worked under him knew better than to question his methods. The thing about Donovan was that he was smart. Not book smart maybe, but street smart in the worst possible way. He knew exactly how to work the system. When complaints came in about his officers targeting Black and Hispanic residents, those papers had a funny way of disappearing. When someone tried to report excessive force, suddenly their own minor infractions would come to light. He had friends on the town council, drinking buddies who'd known him since high school, people who owed him favors. In a small town like Millbrook, that kind of network made you practically untouchable. For years he got away with it. Traffic stops that went too far. Young men roughed up for resisting arrest when they'd done nothing wrong. Evidence that somehow went missing when it would have helped the wrong kind of defendant. And through it all, Donovan smiled at town meetings, showed up at church on Sundays, and played the part of the dedicated public servant protecting his community. But 300 miles away in the regional FBI office, someone was finally paying attention. Special Agent Maya Johnson sat in a conference room, reading through a file that had been passed around for months before landing on her desk. It wasn't one complaint. It wasn't even 10. It was a pattern of behavior so consistent, so documented, that it was amazing no one had acted on it sooner. Maya was the kind of agent who'd earned her badge the hard way. 10 years in the field, working everything from organized crime to public corruption. She'd grown up in a neighborhood not too different from parts of Millbrook, knew what it felt like when the people supposed to protect you were the ones you feared most. That's what drove her. Not some abstract sense of justice, but the memory of her own cousin being hassled by cops for walking home from basketball practice. The fury of watching her uncle get pulled over for the 5th time in a month for matching a description. When her supervisor laid out the assignment, she didn't hesitate. Go undercover in Millbrook, pose as a regular civilian, gather evidence on Donovan and his department. The anonymous tips had been piling up for 2 years, all pointing to the same thing: systematic corruption, civil rights violations, and a police chief who thought he was above the law. It won't be easy, her supervisor warned. Small towns like this, they notice outsiders. And Donovan's paranoid. He's got eyes everywhere. Maya just nodded. She'd done harder assignments. The key was patience, blend in. Don't push too hard too fast. Let people come to you with their stories instead of hunting them down. And most importantly, don't give Donovan any reason to see you as a threat until you had everything you needed. The plan was simple on paper. Maya would pose as a freelance journalist doing a story on small-town life in America. It was a perfect cover because it gave her a reason to ask questions, to be curious, to talk to people from all walks of life. She'd rent a place, settle in, become part of the background, and all the while she'd be watching, listening, and documenting everything. As she drove into Millbrook for the first time, the late afternoon sun casting everything in golden light, Maya felt that familiar mix of anticipation and caution. The town looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Like those horror movies where everything seems perfect right before you realize something's very, very wrong. She'd rented a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with old hardwood floors and windows that looked out over the town square. The landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed sweet enough, chatting about the town's history as she handed over the keys. "You picked a good time to visit," Mrs. Patterson said with a smile. "Fall festival's coming up in a few weeks. Whole town comes out for it." Maya smiled back, playing her role perfectly. "That sounds wonderful." I'm hoping to really capture what makes places like Millbrook special. Oh, we're special, all right, Mrs. Patterson said, though something flickered across her face, something that looked almost like worry. But then it was gone, replaced by that pleasant small-town hospitality. You need anything at all, you just holler. That first week, Maya did exactly what a journalist would do. She visited the local coffee shop every morning, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in the same spot, letting people get used to seeing her. She went to the library and chatted with the librarian about local history. She ate lunch at the diner, dinner at the pizza place, breakfast at the cafe. Slowly, carefully, she became part of the scenery. And everywhere she went, she listened, really listened, to the conversations that stopped when certain topics came up, to the way people's voices changed when they talked about the police, to the stories that didn't quite add up. The black families in Millbrook were careful. You could see it in how they moved through town, always aware, always cautious. The Hispanic community, mostly folks who worked at the packaging plant on the edge of town, kept to themselves. Nobody said anything directly at first, but Maya had done this long enough to read between the lines. It was the small things that told the real story. The way a mother pulled her son closer when a police car drove by. The teenager who took the long way home to avoid passing the police station. The man at the hardware store who mentioned almost casually that his nephew had been arrested 3 times in 2 years for suspicious behavior while walking in his own neighborhood. Maya documented everything in careful notes, encrypted and sent securely to her team. Patterns were already emerging. Traffic stops concentrated in certain areas, arrest rates that didn't match the town's demographics, a justice system that seemed to have 2 sets of rules depending on what you looked like. But she needed more than observations. She needed hard evidence, the kind that would hold up in federal court, the kind that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And to get that, she'd need to dig deeper, push a little harder and take some risks. She just didn't know yet how dangerous those risks would become, or that in less than 2 weeks she'd find herself in handcuffs, staring down the very man she'd come to investigate. For now, though she sipped her coffee, smiled at the locals and played her part, the story was just beginning, and Maya Johnson was nothing if not patient. After all, the best investigations were like puzzles. You gathered the pieces slowly, carefully, until suddenly the whole picture became clear. And then, only then, did you make your move. Millbrook had secrets. Chief Donovan had made sure of that. But secrets, Maya knew from experience, never stayed buried forever. Someone always talked. Someone always made a mistake. And when they did, she'd be ready. Maya's second week in Millbrook started like the first, with coffee at Annie's cafe and small talk with whoever happened to be sitting nearby. She'd learned that consistency was key in undercover work. People trusted routines. They trusted familiar faces, and in a small town, becoming familiar meant showing up day after day until you were just part of the furniture. The cafe was one of those places that hadn't changed its decor since probably the 80s. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and a jukebox in the corner that still played actual records if you fed it quarters. Annie herself was a round-faced woman in her 60s who seemed to know everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "You writing anything interesting?" Annie asked one morning as she refilled Maya's coffee cup without being asked. Maya looked up from her laptop where she'd been typing up fake notes about the town's architecture. "Just trying to capture the feel of the place, you know. What makes Millbrook different from every other small town?" Annie snorted. "Different? Honey, we're not that different. Same problems as anywhere else, just on a smaller scale." "Like what?" Maya asked, keeping her tone casual, just curious. For a second, Annie looked like she might say something real. Her eyes darted to the window, then back to Maya. But then she just shrugged. "Oh, you know, budget problems. Kids moving away for college and never coming back, keeping businesses alive. The usual." Maya knew a deflection when she heard one. Whatever Annie had been about to say, she'd thought better of it. That happened a lot in Millbrook. People would start to open up, then pull back, like they'd remembered someone was always watching. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. Maya had started attending the weekly community meeting at the town hall, the kind of boring civic gathering where they discussed things like parking regulations and snow removal contracts. Most of the attendees were older, retired folks with time on their hands. But there was one younger woman who caught Maya's attention. Her name was Patricia, and she ran the youth center on the east side of town. the part of Millbrook where most of the Black and Hispanic families lived. She didn't say much during the meetings, but Maya noticed how she took careful notes whenever police funding came up, how her jaw tightened when Chief Donovan gave his monthly reports. After one particularly tense meeting where Donovan had requested additional funding for community safety initiatives, Maya caught up with Patricia in the parking lot. "Hey, I'm Maya. I've seen you at these meetings. You run the youth center, right?" Patricia studied her for a moment, that same cautious look Maya had seen on so many faces in town. "That's right. And you're the journalist. Word travels fast. In Millbrook, everything travels fast." Patricia shifted her bag on her shoulder. "What do you really want to know?" The directness caught Maya off guard, but she appreciated it. "I want to know what's really happening in this town. The stuff that doesn't make it into the official reports." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, looking around the parking lot like she was checking for listeners. Then she sighed. "You got a car? Let's take a drive." They ended up at the youth center, a renovated community building that Patricia had somehow kept running on donations and sheer determination. Inside, a dozen kids were playing basketball, doing homework, just being kids. But Maya noticed how they all tensed when they saw her. A stranger, how the older boys immediately looked wary. "They're used to being suspicious," Patricia said quietly. "You would be too if you got stopped by police every other week for no reason." Over the next hour, Patricia told her things that made Maya's blood boil even as she kept her face neutral. She talked about 14-year-old boys being roughed up for talking back, girls being questioned without parents present, traffic stops that turned into car searches without consent or probable cause, a system where certain kids got second chances and others got criminal records. "I've tried going through official channels," Patricia said, her frustration evident, filed complaints, talked to the town council, even tried reaching out to the county sheriff. But Donovan's got friends everywhere. Complaints disappear. People who push too hard suddenly find themselves dealing with car registration problems or business license issues. It's like he's got the whole town under his thumb. "Would you be willing to go on record?" Maya asked. "Not for a story right now, but would you talk to the right people if there was an investigation?" Patricia looked at her hard. "Who exactly are you?" Maya had been expecting this question eventually. She couldn't reveal her real identity yet, but she could give Patricia enough to build trust. Someone who wants to help. Someone who's dealt with situations like this before. That's all I can say right now. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Patricia nodded slowly. "There are others. People who'd talk if they thought it would actually matter. If they thought someone would finally listen. But they're scared. And they have every right to be, I understand. But would you help me connect with them? Quietly? Maybe. Let me think about it." That was enough for now. Maya knew better than to push. Trust took time, especially when people had been let down so many times before. Over the next few days, Maya's investigation started picking up steam. Patricia introduced her to a few people, always meeting in careful private settings. A mother whose son had been arrested for loitering outside his own apartment building. A young man who'd spent 3 days in jail because Donovan's officers claimed they smelled marijuana during a traffic stop, despite finding nothing. A business owner who'd been told his shop would face extra scrutiny after he complained about an officer harassing his customers. The stories were remarkably consistent, a pattern of targeting, harassment, and abuse that went back years, and always at the center of it was Chief Donovan, either directly involved or protecting the officers who were. Maya documented everything. Her encrypted laptop filled with testimonies, times, dates, specific incidents. Her FBI team back at headquarters was building a case file, cross-referencing everything with arrest records, court documents, and complaint forms that had supposedly been lost or misfiled. But she needed something concrete. Eyewitness accounts were important, but they could be dismissed as he said, she said. She needed to catch Donovan or his officers in the act, on video, doing something so clearly wrong that there'd be no way to explain it away. That opportunity came sooner than she expected, and in a way that made her wish she'd been recording everything from day one. She was walking back from the library one afternoon when she saw it. 2 police officers, one of them Derek Mills, Donovan's right-hand man, had pulled up beside a teenage boy who was sitting on a bench outside the Quick Stop convenience store. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, skinny, wearing a basketball jersey, just sitting there with a bottle of Gatorade and his phone. Maya slowed her pace, staying back but watching. The officers got out of their car, and immediately their body language was aggressive. Not the casual, "Hey, how's it going?" approach you'd use with a kid just sitting around. This was confrontational from the start. She couldn't hear everything, but she could see it all. Mills standing over the kid, who'd stood up when they approached, his hands visible, clearly trying to be respectful, the other officer circling around behind. Mills's finger jabbing toward the kid's chest. The kid shaking his head, trying to explain something. Then Mills grabbed the kid's arm, rough, twisting it behind his back. The kid yelped in pain but didn't resist, didn't fight back. Smart kid, Maya thought grimly. He knew that fighting back would only make things worse. They had him against the wall now, Mills patting him down aggressively while the other officer watched the street. Maya pulled out her phone, trying to look like she was just checking messages but angling it to capture the scene. Her hand was shaking with anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was what she needed. Evidence. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 minutes. They didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. Eventually, they let the kid go with what was clearly a warning. Probably something like, "We better not catch you loitering here again." The boy nodded, grabbed his Gatorade from where it had fallen on the ground, and walked away fast, not looking back. As the police car drove off, Maya saw the kid's mother come running out of the quick stop looking panicked. She'd probably been inside paying for groceries, came out to find police hassling her son. Maya watched them have a quick, urgent conversation, the mother checking the kid over, making sure he was okay. Then they both hurried to their car and left. Maya wanted to follow them, to tell them she'd recorded it, to promise that this time it would matter. But she couldn't, not yet. Breaking her cover now would ruin everything. Instead, she went back to her apartment and uploaded the video to the secure FBI server, along with detailed notes about what she'd witnessed. It was good evidence, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that kid's face, the fear mixed with resignation, like this had happened before and would happen again. She thought about all the other kids in Millbrook who lived with that same fear. All the families who'd learned to just accept it because fighting back seemed impossible. Not anymore, Maya promised herself. Not if she had anything to say about it. Chief Robert Donovan wasn't a stupid man. Paranoid, yes. Power-hungry, absolutely. But stupid? Never. And that paranoia, that constant suspicion of everyone and everything, was exactly what made him dangerous. He'd noticed the new woman in town within days of her arrival. In a place like Millbrook, population just under 8,000, newcomers stood out, especially newcomers who asked questions, especially newcomers who seemed just a little too interested in things that were none of their business. That journalist, he'd said to Officer Derek Mills one morning, jabbing his finger at a grainy printout from a traffic camera showing Maya's car. "I want to know everything about her. Where she goes, who she talks to, what she's really doing here." Mills had nodded. He'd been Donovan's loyal dog for 7 years now, ever since Donovan had made a DUI charge disappear for him. In Donovan's department, loyalty wasn't earned through respect. It was bought with favors and enforced through fear. So Mills had watched, and what he'd reported back hadn't made Donovan any less suspicious. This so-called journalist spent an awful lot of time in the wrong neighborhoods, talking to the wrong people, people who'd filed complaints before, people who didn't know when to keep their mouths shut. She was at the youth center yesterday, Mills had told him. Spent over an hour talking to Patricia Henderson. That had been enough for Donovan. Patricia was a troublemaker, always had been. Always asking questions at town meetings, always watching him with those judgmental eyes like she thought she was better than him. And now she was talking to some outsider who claimed to be writing about small-town life. No way. Something wasn't right. For the next week, Donovan had one of his officers tail Maya whenever she left her apartment. They noted who she talked to, where she went, what she did. They ran her license plate more times than necessary. They looked for anything, any little violation they could use to pull her over, to search her stuff, to figure out what she was really up to. But Maya Johnson hadn't made it 10 years in the FBI by being careless. She'd assumed she was being watched from the beginning. She varied her routes. She met people in different locations. She never carried anything sensitive in her car. And she made sure to do enough journalist things like photographing buildings and interviewing local business owners to maintain her cover. Still, she knew it was only a matter of time. Donovan was getting nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. She just hadn't expected him to make one quite so soon, or quite so personally. It was a Wednesday evening about 2 weeks into her investigation. Maya had spent the afternoon with Reverend Thomas Clayton, pastor of the Second Baptist Church, one of the few people in Millbrook willing to speak openly about the problems in the police department. He'd shared stories that went back years, stories of young men arrested on false charges, of families torn apart by a justice system that seemed determined to keep certain people down. "I've been in Millbrook for 30 years, the Reverend had told her, his voice heavy with sadness. "And I've watched this town change. Not for the better. Used to be we could trust the police to protect us. Now parents tell their children to avoid them at all costs. That's not how it should be." Maya had thanked him, promised that his testimony would matter, and left just as the sun was starting to set. The Reverend's church was on the east side of town, and the drive back to her apartment took her along Route 47, a quiet 2-lane road that cut through farmland before hitting Main Street. She was maybe 3 miles from town when she saw the lights in her rearview mirror, blue and red flashing bright against the darkening sky. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face calm. This was it. She'd known it was coming. Maya pulled over to the shoulder, put her car in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they'd be visible. Standard procedure. The kind of thing everyone should do during a traffic stop, but that black drivers did religiously because their lives might depend on it. The police car pulled up behind her, and in her side mirror she watched 2 officers get out. Even in the fading light she recognized them. Chief Donovan himself and Officer Mills, not regular patrol officers. The chief of police and his second-in-command, pulling over a civilian on a random stretch of road at dusk. This wasn't about a traffic violation. This was personal. Donovan took his time walking up to her window, letting the moment stretch out, a power play designed to make her nervous. Maya kept her hands on the wheel and her breathing steady. Her concealed body cam, hidden in a button on her jacket, was recording everything. Whatever happened next, there'd be a record. "License and registration," Donovan said when he finally reached her window. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Maya could see the calculation in his eyes. He was studying her, looking for any sign of fear or guilt. "Of course, officer," Maya said politely. She moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for her glove compartment. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "Your taillight's out." Maya knew that was a lie. She'd checked her car that morning specifically because she'd expected something like this, but she didn't argue, not yet. "I wasn't aware of that. I'll get it fixed first thing tomorrow." Donovan took her license, studying it longer than necessary. "New York, huh? Long way from home. What brings you to Millbrook?" "I'm a freelance journalist. I'm doing a piece on small-town America. Is that right?" He handed her license to Mills, who walked back to the patrol car, ostensibly to run it, but really just to draw this out longer. Funny thing about journalists, they tend to ask a lot of questions, sometimes questions that aren't really their business. There it was, the real reason for the stop. Maya kept her expression neutral. "I'm just doing my job, Chief. Talking to people, learning about the community. That's what journalists do." "And what exactly have people been telling you about our community?" "That it's a nice place," Maya said carefully. "Historic, friendly, the usual things." Donovan leaned down closer to her window, and Maya could smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "Here's the thing about small towns, Miss Johnson. We don't like outsiders coming in and stirring up trouble. We take care of our own business our own way. You understand what I'm saying?" It was a threat, barely veiled. Maya felt anger flash through her, but kept it locked down. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just to write a story." "Yeah, well, maybe you should think about writing that story somewhere else. Maybe you've learned enough about Millbrook." Before Maya could respond, Mills came back from the patrol car. He leaned in close to Donovan and whispered something. Maya caught only fragments, but she heard clean record and nothing outstanding. Of course there wasn't. Maya Johnson's cover identity had been created by FBI professionals. It would hold up to anything short of a federal background check. Donovan's jaw tightened. He'd been hoping to find something, anything, to justify what he was about to do, but he'd committed to this course of action, and backing down now would make him look weak. "Step out of the car," he said suddenly. "Why?" Maya asked, still keeping her tone respectful but firm. "Because I'm telling you to. Step out of the car, now." This was it, the moment everything could go sideways. Maya knew her rights. She knew he had no probable cause for this stop, let alone to order her out of the vehicle. But she also knew that in situations like this, asserting your rights could get you hurt or killed if you weren't careful. She took a breath and made her decision. She'd come to Millbrook to catch Donovan breaking the law. Well, here he was doing exactly that. With her body cam recording every second, she could play along a little longer. "All right," she said, and slowly opened her door. The air outside was cooler than she expected, autumn settling into the countryside. She stood beside her car, hands visible, shoulders square. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to identify herself, to end this before it went any further. But she couldn't, not yet. This was the evidence she needed. Donovan hanging himself with his own actions. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Donovan announced. "Do you have probable cause?" Maya asked. Her tone was polite, but the question was direct. Donovan's face reddened. "What did you just say to me?" "I asked if you have probable cause to search my vehicle. Because according to the Fourth Amendment, you need either probable cause or my consent. And I don't consent to a search." The words were barely out of her mouth when Donovan moved. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and spun her around. Maya didn't resist, didn't fight back, just let herself be moved. But inside she was cataloging everything. The excessive force, the lack of cause, the rage on his face. "You think you can come to my town?" Donovan snarled, his face inches from hers. "And quote the Constitution at me? You think you're smart, don't you? Think you're better than us?" "I'm just exercising my rights," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear starting to creep in. This was escalating faster than she'd expected. "Your rights?" Donovan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you about rights. In Millbrook, I decide what rights people have. And right now I've decided you don't have the right to refuse anything I say." He nodded to Mills, who'd been standing back but now stepped forward with handcuffs already out. Maya's heart pounded. This was going too far. Way too far. But she'd started this play and she had to see it through. "You're arresting me?" she asked. "On what charge?" The backseat of a police car is designed to be uncomfortable. Hard plastic seats, no handles on the inside of the doors. A metal grate separating you from the front. It's a cage on wheels, and sitting there with handcuffs cutting into your wrists. Maya felt every bit of it. Through the grate, she could hear Donovan and Mills talking in low voices, but she couldn't make out the words. They were taking their time, not rushing back to the station. Maybe figuring out their story, making sure they had it straight. That was fine. Every minute that passed was another minute her body cam was recording, another minute building her case. But there was that fear too, the one she was trying to push down. Because Maya knew the statistics. She knew what could happen to people in police custody, especially people who'd seen too much, who knew too much. Accidents happened. People fell. They resisted and had to be restrained. She'd investigated enough cases to know how thin the line was between justice and tragedy. The drive to the station should have taken 10 minutes. They stretched it to 20, taking back roads, driving slowly. Psychological warfare, letting her sit there and think about her situation. Donovan glanced back at her a few times in the rearview mirror, that smug look on his face like he'd already won. If only he knew. When they finally pulled into the station parking lot, it was almost full dark. The Millbrook Police Department was a squat brick building that looked like it had been built in the 70s and never updated. A single-story structure with narrow windows and a parking lot that needed repaving. A flag hung limply from a pole out front, and a yellow light flickered above the entrance. Mills hauled Maya out of the car, not gentle about it. She stumbled but caught herself. Wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her fall. As they walked her toward the entrance, she noticed a few people in the parking lot, officers changing shifts heading home. They all stopped to stare. Word would spread fast. The journalist got arrested. Don't mess with the chief. Perfect, Maya thought grimly. More witnesses. Inside, the station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. The front desk was unmanned, which was probably deliberate. No witnesses to the booking process or lack thereof. Donovan led the way down a hallway, past a room where 2 officers were doing paperwork. They looked up, surprised to see the chief doing a personal escort, but neither said anything. You didn't question Donovan, not if you wanted to keep your job. They took her to a holding cell at the back of the building, a small room with concrete walls, a metal bench, and a toilet in the corner. No privacy screen, no mattress, just the bare minimum required by law. You're going to sit here tonight and think about whether you really want to keep poking around in business that's not yours, Donovan said as Mills removed the handcuffs. Maya's wrists were red and sore where the metal had been. She rubbed them, keeping her face neutral. I'm entitled to a phone call, she said. You'll get one when I say you get one. That's a violation of my rights. Again. Donovan stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate her. You keep talking about your rights like they mean something. Let me explain how this works. You're in my station, in my town, and you're going to learn to show some respect, or you're going to have a very unpleasant night. Maya met his eyes without flinching. I know how this works. You're trying to scare me into leaving town. You think if you rough me up, throw me in a cell, I'll get the message and disappear. It's what you've done to other people who ask too many questions, isn't it? His jaw clenched. She'd hit a nerve. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? How many other people have sat in this cell for no reason? How many false arrests have you made over the years? How many lives have you ruined just because you could? For a second, she thought he might hit her. His hand actually came up, formed a fist, but then he caught himself. Even Donovan knew that beating a suspect in a holding cell was a line he couldn't cross, not without serious consequences. At least not with Mills standing right there as a witness. Instead, he smiled. And somehow that was more frightening than the anger had been. Enjoy your night, Miss Johnson. We'll process you in the morning. Maybe. Or maybe we'll forget you're here for a while. Paperwork gets lost sometimes. He left, Mills following, and the heavy door clanged shut behind them. Maya heard the lock turn, and then their footsteps receding down the hallway. She was alone. For a long moment she just stood there, letting the reality of the situation sink in. She was in a locked cell in a corrupt police station and nobody knew where she was. Well, nobody who could help her immediately. Her FBI team knew she was in Millbrook, but they wouldn't expect to hear from her until her next scheduled check-in tomorrow afternoon. A lot could happen between now and then. Maya sat down on the metal bench, which was just as uncomfortable as it looked. She checked her body cam discreetly, making sure the button was still in place, still recording. It was. Everything from the traffic stop to this moment was documented. Federal evidence that would destroy Donovan's career and probably land him in prison. But first, she had to get out of this cell with that evidence intact. She'd been trained for situations like this. The FBI didn't send agents undercover without preparing them for worst-case scenarios. She knew her rights. She knew the law, and she knew that even in a corrupt department there were limits to what Donovan could do. He could hold her overnight without charges. He could make her uncomfortable, but he couldn't make her disappear. Not in the modern age, not with her car still on Route 47, not with people having seen her arrest. The trick was staying calm and waiting for the right moment. Hours passed. Maya had no watch, no phone, no way to track time except by the changing sounds of the station. She heard shift changes, officers coming and going, voices in the hallway. Once, someone walked past her cell and looked in through the small window in the door. A younger officer couldn't have been more than 25. He looked troubled, like he wanted to say something, but then he kept walking. Around what Maya guessed was 10 or 11 at night, everything went quiet. The night shift was minimal in a small town like Millbrook. Probably just 1 or 2 officers on duty and they'd be out patrolling, not sitting at the station. That's when the door opened again. Officer Mills stood there, and he didn't look friendly. Chief says you've been thinking about things. Says you ready to cooperate now? I'm ready to make my phone call, Maya said. As is my legal right, Mills laughed. You really don't get it, do you? There's no lawyers coming to save you. No ACLU, no media. This is Millbrook. The chief runs this town, and what he says goes. The law says otherwise. The law, Mills repeated like the word was funny. Let me tell you about the law, lady. The law is whatever we say it is. You got no witnesses, no evidence, nothing. It's your word against a chief of police with 15 years of service. Who do you think people are going to believe? Maya leaned forward slightly. They're going to believe the evidence, and I have plenty of it. That gave him pause. What evidence? Everything. Every illegal stop, every false arrest, every violation. It's all documented. And even if you delete the files from my laptop, even if you destroy my notes, it doesn't matter. Because it's already been sent somewhere, you can't touch it. It was a bluff, sort of. The evidence existed, but it wasn't complete enough yet. Not for a federal case. But Mills didn't know that, and the doubt flickering across his face told Maya her words had landed. You're lying. he said, but he didn't sound certain. Am I? You really want to take that chance? Because right now, you're just following orders. Complicit, yes, but not the main target. But if you cross certain lines, if you help Donovan do something really stupid, you're going down with him. And federal prison isn't kind to former cops. Mills's face went pale. Maya pressed her advantage. I'm going to make my phone call now. You can either let me do it voluntarily, or you can refuse and add another charge to the list. But either way, this ends badly for everyone except me. The only question is how many people go down. For a long moment, Mills just stood there, clearly torn. He was loyal to Donovan, sure, but he wasn't suicidal, and Maya could see the wheels turning in his head. The calculations being made. How much did he really owe the chief? Was it worth risking his own future? One call, he finally said. 5 minutes. And I'm listening the whole time. That's fine, Maya said, standing up. My call won't take long. He led her to a phone in the booking area, an old landline that looked like it belonged in a museum. Maya picked up the receiver, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself a small smile. This was it, the moment everything changed. She dialed a number she'd memorized months ago, a direct line that bypassed all the usual FBI channels and went straight to her regional director. It rang twice before someone picked up. This is Special Agent Maya Johnson, she said clearly, making sure Mills heard every word. Badge number 74296. I'm currently being illegally detained at the Millbrook Police Department. I need immediate extraction and a federal response team. Authorization code Bravo Echo 7. The silence in the room was deafening. Mills's face went from pale to white, his eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. What? He whispered. Maya ignored him, listening to the voice on the other end of the line confirm her identity and location. The next 15 minutes felt like the longest of Maya's life. She could hear raised voices from somewhere deep in the station, Donovan and Mills, arguing. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone said everything. Panic, disbelief, anger, then silence. Maya stayed by the phone, standing straight, breathing steady. She knew what was coming. Donovan would emerge, probably trying to bluff his way through this, maybe trying to convince her it was all a misunderstanding, maybe even trying to cut a deal. Men like him always thought they could talk their way out of anything, but there was no talking out of this. The door at the end of the hallway burst open, and there he was. Chief Robert Donovan, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the station. Mills trailed behind him, looking like a man walking to his own execution. Donovan stopped a few feet from Maya, his eyes scanning her like he was seeing her for the first time, looking for the lie, the trick, the angle. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're just some journalist trying to... FBI Special Agent Maya Johnson, she interrupted, her voice calm and professional. Badge number 74296. I've been conducting an undercover investigation into civil rights violations and police corruption in Millbrook for the past 3 weeks. And you just gave me everything I needed to shut this department down. You can't just... Donovan started, but his words died, because he could see it in her eyes. The confidence, the certainty. This wasn't a scared woman in over her head. This was a federal agent who'd just watched him hang himself. I can, and I did, Maya said. Every conversation I've had, every interview I've conducted, every incident I've witnessed, it's all documented and filed with the FBI, including tonight, especially tonight. Donovan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You had no right to come into my town, lying about who you were, manipulating people. I had every right. Maya cut him off. I had probable cause based on multiple complaints, filed with the Department of Justice over the past 2 years. Complaints you thought were buried. They weren't. They were building a case. And I was sent here to prove what we already suspected. That you're running this department like your personal kingdom, targeting citizens based on race, violating their constitutional rights, and covering it up with intimidation and threats. That's not... Don't. Maya's voice was sharp now, all pretense of civility gone. Don't stand there and lie to me. I've talked to your victims. I've seen the arrest records. I've watched your officers harass teenagers for the crime of existing while black. I witnessed Officer Mills right here assault a 16-year-old boy who was doing nothing but sitting outside a store waiting for his mother. And tonight, you personally violated my Fourth Amendment rights, arrested me without cause, denied me due process, and threatened me while I was in custody." She took a step closer to him, and for the first time, Donovan actually backed up. "Here's what's going to happen, Chief. In about 15 minutes, the FBI is going to arrive. They're going to take control of this station. They're going to seize all your files, all your computers, all your records. They're going to interview every officer in this department. And they're going to arrest you for civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy, and whatever else they find when they dig into your corrupt little operation." "I want my lawyer," Donovan said. His voice had gone hoarse. "You'll get one. That's more than you've given a lot of your victims." Maya glanced at Mills, who was standing there looking like he might cry. "Officer Mills, I suggest you start thinking about what you're going to say when the federal investigators talk to you, because you've got one chance to come out of this with any kind of future, and that's full cooperation. Names, dates, incidents, everything. You understand?" Mills nodded mutely. The sound of car doors slamming outside made everyone freeze. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her backup had arrived. Through the front windows, she could see the distinctive unmarked SUVs that federal agents loved. 3 of them, plus a van. Serious response. The front door opened, and Regional Director Thomas Crawford walked in like he owned the place, followed by 6 agents and FBI windbreakers. Crawford was in his 50s, built like a linebacker, with gray hair and the kind of presence that filled a room. He'd been Maya's supervisor for 5 years, and she'd never been happier to see him. "Director Crawford," Maya said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "Agent Johnson." He looked her over quickly, checking for injuries, then his eyes went hard as they fixed on Donovan. "Chief Robert Donovan, I presume." Donovan drew himself up, trying to salvage some dignity. "This is highly irregular. You can't just storm into a police station and—" "Actually, we can," Crawford interrupted, "and we are. As of this moment, the Millbrook Police Department is under federal investigation. All officers are to remain in the building. All files, computers, and records are to be secured. And you, Chief Donovan, are under arrest." 2 agents moved forward, and Donovan's face went from red to purple. "On what charges?" Crawford pulled out a folded document from his jacket. "For starters, deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 18 U.S.C., Section 242, false arrest of a federal officer, obstruction of justice. Should I continue?" "This is a setup," Donovan sputtered. "She came here under false pretenses. She was conducting a lawful federal investigation based on multiple credible complaints," Crawford said, his voice cold. "An investigation that you just made infinitely easier by personally demonstrating the exact behavior we were investigating. Agent Johnson, do you have the evidence?" Maya reached up and carefully removed the button camera from her jacket. "Everything from the traffic stop to the arrest to the threats made while I was in custody. It's all here." Crawford took the camera, handing it to another agent who immediately logged it as evidence. "Outstanding work, Agent Johnson. Are you injured?" "Nothing serious, bruises from the handcuffs, but I'll be fine. We'll get you checked out anyway." He turned back to Donovan. "Chief, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As Crawford read Donovan his Miranda rights, Maya watched the chief's face cycle through emotions. Disbelief, anger, fear, and finally, resignation. The moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the same handcuffs he'd used on her just hours ago, his shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. He knew it was over. Officer Mills was standing off to the side, looking lost. One of the FBI agents approached him. "Officer Derek Mills, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning." "Am I under arrest?" Mills asked, his voice small. "Not yet. But that depends entirely on how cooperative you are in the next few hours." They led both men out, Donovan in cuffs, Mills in shocked silence. Maya watched them go, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was finally being served. Sadness because it had taken this long, because so many people had suffered before she'd arrived. As the agents began securing the building, Crawford pulled Maya aside. "You okay?" "Really?" Maya nodded. "I'm okay. It got intense there for a while. I wasn't sure how far he'd go. You did good work. Better than good. The evidence you gathered over these 3 weeks is damning. Combined with tonight's incident, we've got him dead to rights." He paused. "Though I have to say, getting yourself arrested wasn't exactly protocol. I didn't plan it," Maya said with a slight smile. "But when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. He showed his true colors, and now we have it all on video. The body cam footage is going to be crucial. His lawyers are going to argue entrapment, that you provoked the response. Let them argue. I never identified myself until after I was illegally arrested. I never provoked anything. I was a civilian exercising my constitutional rights, and he violated them. The fact that I'm FBI doesn't change the illegality of his actions." Crawford nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right, and that's exactly what we'll argue in court." Over the next hour, the station transformed into a federal crime scene. Agents photographed everything, seized computers, boxed up files. Other officers who'd been on duty or called in were separated and questioned. Some were defiant, loyal to Donovan to the end. Others, seeing which way the wind was blowing, started talking immediately. Patricia from the youth center showed up around midnight, having heard through the town grapevine that something big was happening at the police station. When she saw Maya standing there with FBI agents, her hand went to her mouth. "You're really with the FBI?" she asked. "I am. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you." Patricia shook her head, and to Maya's surprise, she smiled. "Don't apologize. You did what needed to be done. I just wish." Her voice cracked. "I just wish someone had done this sooner." "I know," Maya said softly. "But it's happening now. And everyone who was hurt by Donovan, everyone who filed a complaint or wanted to but was too scared, they're all going to get their chance to be heard. Really heard this time. What happens next?" "Next, we build the case. We'll need statements from everyone willing to testify. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but it will be thorough, and it will be fair. That's a promise." Patricia looked out at the police station, now crawling with federal agents, and nodded. By the time the sun was fully up, Millbrook was a town transformed. News vans from 3 different networks had already arrived, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers. Reporters stood on Main Street, cameras rolling, talking about corruption and justice and a small town's reckoning with its past. The video started circulating around 6 in the morning. Someone who'd driven past Maya's arrest the night before had recorded it on their phone. Grainy, shaky footage, but clear enough to see Chief Donovan grabbing her arm, slamming her against the car, cuffing her roughly while she stood there calmly, not resisting. The video was only 43 seconds long, but it was enough. Within 2 hours, it had been shared 10,000 times. By noon, it was national news. By evening, it would have millions of views, sparking outrage and demands for accountability across the country. But the real story was happening behind closed doors at the Millbrook Police Department, where FBI forensic accountants and investigators were pulling apart 15 years of records, finding threads that would unravel the entire corrupt system Donovan had built. Maya sat in a conference room that had been converted into a temporary FBI command center, walking Director Crawford and 2 other senior agents through her investigation step by step. She had 3 weeks of detailed notes, recorded conversations, witness statements, and documented incidents. Every piece of it was being cataloged, verified, and added to the growing case file. "The pattern is consistent across the board," Maya explained, pointing to a chart she'd created showing arrest rates by neighborhood. "The east side of town, which is predominantly African American and Latino, has an arrest rate 3 times higher than the west side, which is predominantly white. But when you look at the actual crimes, there's no statistical justification for the disparity." One of the agents, a woman named Lisa Chen, who specialized in civil rights cases, leaned forward. "What about the charges? What were people typically arrested for? Low-level offenses. Disorderly conduct, loitering, resisting arrest without any underlying charge. Things that gave officers wide discretion. And here's the thing. When you cross-reference these arrests with court records, you find a lot of cases where charges were dropped or reduced. But the arrest still happened. The humiliation still happened. And in a town this small, having a record, even if the charges don't stick, can destroy your reputation and your opportunities. Crawford shook his head. Classic intimidation tactic. Keep certain populations in line through constant low-level harassment. Exactly. And it worked because nobody could fight back. File a complaint and it disappeared. Try to get a lawyer. And you'd find yourself facing new charges. Leave town and the harassment stopped. So people either left or learned to live with it. Lisa was reading through witness statements. Some of these accounts are heartbreaking. Parents afraid to let their kids walk to school. Business owners who stopped calling the police even when they needed help because they knew it would only make things worse. This is systemic oppression, plain and simple. And it goes deeper than just harassment, Maya said, pulling up financial records on her laptop. While you've been questioning the other officers, I've been going through Donovan's personal finances. There are some interesting patterns. Regular deposits from a company called Sentinel Correctional Services. Crawford's eyebrows went up. The private prison operator? The same. They run a medium security facility about 60 miles from here, and it seems they've been paying Donovan a consulting fee for the past 7 years. $5,000 a month. For what consultation? That's the question, isn't it? But when you look at the timing of the payments and the arrest rates, there's a correlation. The payments started the same year Donovan began pushing for harsher sentencing recommendations. The year he started his so-called Tough on Crime initiative. Lisa's face hardened. He was getting kickbacks for filling their prison. That's what it looks like. We'll need to subpoena Sentinel's records to prove it, but yes, I think Donovan was being financially incentivized to arrest and incarcerate as many people as possible. The room fell silent for a moment as the full scope of the corruption sank in. This wasn't just a bad cop with a prejudice. This was a calculated system of oppression for profit. This is going to be bigger than we thought, Crawford said finally. We're not just looking at civil rights violations. This is conspiracy, racketeering, corruption. We might need to bring in the organized crime division. As they continued working, Officer Mills was in another room, telling investigators everything he knew. And it turned out he knew a lot. Mills had been Donovan's second-in-command for 7 years, and in that time, he'd seen and done things that kept him up at night. He talked about the quota system, the unwritten but clearly understood expectation that officers needed to make a certain number of arrests each month. Especially in target areas, he described how Donovan had personally trained them on what he called proactive policing, but what was really just racial profiling. He'd tell us to watch for certain types of people, Mills said, his voice shaking. He never said black people or Hispanic people directly, but we all knew what he meant. Suspicious characters. Known troublemakers. And if we brought someone in from the east side, he'd be happy. If we went a week without any arrests from those neighborhoods, he'd ask why we weren't doing our jobs. The FBI agent interviewing him, a veteran named Frank Rodriguez, kept his voice neutral. And you followed these instructions? Yes. Mills dropped his head into his hands. God help me, yes. I told myself I was just doing my job, that I was following orders. But I knew it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. Tell me about specific incidents, times when you personally violated someone's rights under Chief Donovan's orders or with his knowledge. For the next 3 hours, Mills talked. He gave names, dates, details. Some incidents matched what Maya had documented. Others were new, going back years before she'd arrived. Each story made the case against Donovan stronger and painted a picture of a department that had completely lost its way. Meanwhile, in town, the news was spreading and reactions were divided. The west side, the wealthier, whiter part of Millbrook, was largely in shock. They'd known Donovan as a tough but fair chief who kept crime low. They'd bought into his narrative about protecting the community. Now they were learning that protecting the community had really meant oppressing part of it. But on the east side, in the neighborhoods that had lived under Donovan's thumb for 15 years, there was a different reaction. Relief, vindication, and anger that it had taken this long. At the Second Baptist Church, Reverend Clayton held an impromptu meeting that evening. The sanctuary was packed, standing room only, with people who needed to be together, to share this moment, to start processing what it meant. For 15 years, the Reverend said from the pulpit, his voice resonating through the space, we have been telling anyone who would listen that something was wrong in this town, that our children were being targeted, that our families were being harassed, that the very people sworn to protect us were instead oppressing us. And for 15 years we were ignored. We were dismissed. We were told we were exaggerating, that we were being paranoid, that we just needed to cooperate more. He paused, looking out at the congregation. Well, today the truth came out. Today the FBI confirmed what we've been saying all along. We weren't crazy. We weren't paranoid. We were being systematically oppressed by a corrupt police chief and a department that had forgotten what justice means. There were murmurs of agreement, some people crying, others nodding. But this isn't a day for celebration, the Reverend continued, because justice delayed is justice denied. Because we lost 15 years. Because young men have criminal records for crimes they didn't commit. Because families were torn apart. Because people left this town not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't take the harassment anymore. The fact that the truth finally came out doesn't erase all that pain. Patricia stood up from her pew. So what do we do now, Reverend? Where do we go from here? Clayton smiled, sad but determined. Now we rebuild. The FBI agent, the woman who exposed all this, she told me that they're going to need witnesses, people willing to testify about what happened to them. And I know that's scary. I know some of you are thinking it's easier to just let it go, to move on. But if we don't speak up now, if we don't make sure the truth is told completely and publicly, then we're letting Donovan win one last time. I'll testify, said a woman in the back. He arrested my son 3 times for nothing. 3 times. And each time it was harder for him to get a job, harder for him to believe in himself. I'll tell anyone who'll listen what that man did to my family. I'll testify too, said a man near the front. They pulled me over so many times I lost count. Searched my car without permission, treated me like a criminal in my own town. Yeah, I'll testify. One by one, people stood up. Young and old, men and women, all with stories to tell, all ready to finally be heard. Back at the police station, Director Crawford was getting reports from agents who'd been canvassing the town, interviewing people, gathering statements. The volume of complaints was staggering. They'd expected dozens. They were getting hundreds. The FBI occupation of the Millbrook Police Department, as some locals started calling it, stretched into its 2nd week. The small town had become a hub of federal activity, with agents coming and going, boxes of evidence being loaded into trucks, and a steady stream of witnesses arriving to give statements. The conference room on the 2nd floor had been transformed into what investigators called the war room. Whiteboards covered in timelines, photographs pinned to corkboards showing connections between people and events, and tables stacked with bankers' boxes full of documents. This was where the full scope of Donovan's corruption was finally coming into focus. And it was worse than anyone had initially suspected. Agent Lisa Chen stood in front of one of the whiteboards, adding another name to the web of connections. Okay, so we've now confirmed that Officer Mills wasn't the only one receiving benefits from Donovan. At least 4 other officers got preferential treatment in exchange for loyalty. One had a DUI charge disappear. Another got help with a messy divorce that should have cost him his badge. Donovan kept files on all of them, insurance policies to make sure they stayed in line. Maya looked up from the financial documents she'd been reviewing. So he wasn't just corrupt. He was smart about it. Built a system where everyone was compromised, everyone had something to lose if they talked. Exactly. And it gets worse. Lisa pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop and projected it onto the wall. We've been going through the evidence locker inventory. There are discrepancies going back 8 years. Drugs that were logged in but are now missing. Cash from seizures that was never properly accounted for. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Director Crawford, who'd been on a conference call with the U.S. Attorney's Office, ended his call and joined them. Let me guess. The missing evidence coincides with cases that were dismissed or never went to trial. You got it, Lisa confirmed. Donovan would seize drugs or money during arrests, log them into evidence, but then they'd mysteriously disappear before trial. Without the physical evidence, prosecutors couldn't make their cases stick. Charges got dropped. And the drugs and money? Gone. He was running his own little criminal enterprise, Maya said, disgust evident in her voice, using his badge to steal from criminals and sell it back on the street. We think so, but proving it is going to be harder. The records are incomplete, deliberately so. We're going to need someone on the inside to confirm how the system worked. That's when Officer Mills became even more valuable. Over the past week, he'd gone from reluctant witness to full cooperation, and the information he was providing was explosive. Mills had decided that if he was going down, he wasn't going down alone, and he was telling investigators everything he knew about Donovan's operation. In an interview room down the hall, Mills was talking to Agent Frank Rodriguez, and the picture he painted was damning. The evidence room was Donovan's personal bank, Mills explained, his voice hoarse from hours of talking. He had the only master key. Other officers could log evidence in, but only he could access everything. Every few months, stuff would just disappear. We all knew it was happening, but nobody said anything because we knew what happened to people who crossed him. What happened to them? Frank asked. They got transferred to the worst shifts. They got passed over for promotions. Their families got harassed, or they just got fired on some trumped-up charge. Donovan made examples out of people. There was this one officer, Danny Torres, good guy, really cared about the community. He questioned why so many arrests were happening on the east side. Donovan had him gone within a month, planted evidence in his locker, accused him of stealing, fired him for cause so he couldn't even get unemployment. Frank made notes. Do you know where Torres is now? Last I heard, he was working security at a mall 3 states away. His career was destroyed. His reputation was destroyed. All because he asked questions. We'll need to talk to him. His testimony could be crucial. Mills nodded. There were others too. Officers who left rather than be part of what Donovan was doing. If you can find them, they might talk now that he's been arrested. The interview continued with Mills providing names, dates, specific incidents. Each piece of information was another nail in Donovan's coffin. Another thread in the web of corruption that had strangled Millbrook for over a decade. Meanwhile, Maya was following the money trail, and it led to places she hadn't expected. The payments from Sentinel Correctional Services were just the beginning. There were also payments from a bail bonds company, from a towing service that had an exclusive contract with the police department, even from a lawyer who specialized in defending the DUI cases that Donovan's officers seemed to generate in large numbers. It's a whole ecosystem of corruption, Maya explained to Crawford. Donovan arrests someone. They need bail. They go to the bail bonds company that gives him kickbacks. Their car gets impounded by the towing service that pays him. They hire the lawyer who gives him referral fees. Everyone in the system profits except the person being arrested. Crawford shook his head in amazement. 15 years. He's been doing this for 15 years and nobody caught on. People caught on, Maya corrected. They just couldn't do anything about it. Or when they tried, they were shut down. She pulled up a file on her computer. Look at this. In the past 10 years, there have been 47 formal complaints filed against Donovan or his officers with various agencies. The town council, the county sheriff, even the state police. Every single one of them was either dismissed, lost in paperwork, or resulted in no action. How is that possible? Because Donovan had friends everywhere. He'd been chief for 15 years. He knew people. He had dirt on people. And in a small town, those connections matter. The town council members who might have investigated him, he helped get them elected. The county sheriff, they went to the police academy together. The state police, he'd worked cases with them, built relationships. Nobody wanted to be the one to go after him because nobody wanted to make an enemy of the most powerful law enforcement officer in the county. Until you showed up? Maya smiled grimly. Until I showed up with the full weight of the federal government behind me. That's what it took. Not local accountability, not state oversight, federal intervention. And that's the real tragedy here. The system that was supposed to provide checks and balances completely failed. As the investigation deepened, more victims came forward. The FBI had set up a hotline and it was ringing constantly. Each call was logged, each complaint documented. Each story added to the growing mountain of evidence. There was the college student who'd been arrested for marijuana possession, lost his scholarship and had to drop out of school, only to later find out the marijuana found in his car had mysteriously disappeared from the evidence locker before his trial. There was the single mother who'd been pulled over 17 times in 2 years. Always on her way to or from work. Always let go with a warning, but always late to her job because of the stops, until finally she was fired for tardiness. There was the small business owner whose shop had been robbed 3 times. But when he called the police, they'd taken hours to respond and never caught anyone. Meanwhile, when a store on the west side of town was robbed, officers were there in minutes and made an arrest within a week. Story after story, pattern after pattern, all pointing to the same systematic oppression of anyone Donovan deemed undesirable. Patricia from the youth center had become an unofficial liaison between the FBI and the community, helping to connect investigators with witnesses and making sure people felt safe coming forward. She sat with Maya one afternoon, going through a list of young people who'd had run-ins with Donovan's department. This boy, Kevin Williams, he was 15 when they arrested him for resisting arrest, Patricia said, pointing to a name on her list. But there was no underlying charge. They never said what he was being arrested for in the first place. He spent 3 days in juvenile detention before a judge threw the whole thing out. But those 3 days traumatized him. He's 19 now, barely leaves his house, doesn't trust anyone in authority. Maya made a note. Would he be willing to talk to us? I think so. Especially if he knew it might help prevent this from happening to someone else. Set it up. We want to hear from everyone who was hurt by this. The testimony from young people like Kevin was particularly heartbreaking. Many of them had been children when Donovan's harassment started. They'd grown up learning to fear the police, to see them as enemies rather than protectors. The psychological damage was deep and would take years to heal. But there were also stories of resistance, of people who'd refused to be broken. Like Angela Martinez, a high school teacher who documented every traffic stop she experienced over 5 years, keeping meticulous records of dates, times, locations, and the officers involved. She'd known someday it would matter. I have notebooks full of this stuff, Angela told the FBI agents interviewing her. 73 traffic stops in 5 years. They never gave me a ticket. It was always a warning, but they'd make me wait on the side of the road for 30-40 minutes. They'd search my car even when I said no. They'd ask me invasive questions about where I was going, who I was seeing. It was harassment. 6 months after that night when Maya Johnson revealed her FBI badge in the Millbrook Police Department, former Chief Robert Donovan stood in a federal courthouse, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his police uniform. The courtroom was packed, standing room only, with people who'd driven from Millbrook and beyond to witness this moment. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and revelations that had shocked even people who thought they knew how bad things were. The prosecution had called 47 witnesses, from former officers to victims to forensic accountants who'd traced every dollar of Donovan's corrupt earnings. Maya had been the star witness, spending 2 full days on the stand. She'd walked the jury through her investigation, showed them the body cam footage of her arrest, explained in detail how Donovan had violated not just her rights, but the rights of hundreds of people over 15 years. The defense had tried to argue entrapment, claiming that Maya had provoked the response, that Donovan had acted reasonably given the circumstances. But when the jury watched the video, when they saw him grab her without cause, arrest her without grounds, deny her basic rights, those arguments fell apart. Agent Johnson was exercising her constitutional rights. The prosecutor had argued in closing statements. She was a civilian as far as Chief Donovan knew, and she calmly, politely asked why she was being stopped and refused an illegal search. That's not provocation. That's citizenship. And Chief Donovan's response to that lawful exercise of rights was to violate them further. That tells you everything you need to know about how he ran his department and treated his community. The evidence of financial corruption had been equally damning. Spreadsheets showing payments from Sentinel Correctional Services, bank records revealing shell companies and hidden accounts, testimony from a Sentinel executive who'd turned state's evidence admitting that yes, they'd paid Donovan based on how many people from Millbrook ended up in their facility. We called it a consulting arrangement, the executive had testified, looking ashamed. But we all knew what it really was. We were paying him to keep our beds full, and he delivered. The victim testimony had been the most powerful part of the trial. One by one, people had taken the stand and told their stories. The mother whose son had been arrested 3 times for nothing. The teacher who'd been stopped 73 times in 5 years. The teenager who'd been roughed up outside a convenience store. the business owner whose complaints had been ignored while he was robbed repeatedly. Each story by itself might have seemed like an isolated incident, but together, they painted an undeniable picture of systematic oppression, of a police chief who'd used his power not to protect and serve but to control and profit. Patricia from the youth center had testified, her voice strong and clear. Chief Donovan didn't just break laws, he broke spirits. He broke families. He broke the fundamental trust that has to exist between a community and the people sworn to protect it. And he did it deliberately, knowingly, for years. The defense had tried to discredit the witnesses, suggesting they were exaggerating or lying, that they had grudges against law enforcement. But there were too many of them, from too many different backgrounds with too many corroborating details. The pattern was impossible to deny. Officer Mills had also testified, looking broken and remorseful. He'd admitted his own role in the corruption, acknowledged the pain he'd caused. "I followed orders," he'd said quietly. "And that's not an excuse. That's just the truth. I followed orders because I was afraid of Chief Donovan, and because it was easier than standing up to him. And I'm going to regret that for the rest of my life." Mills had already accepted a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison followed by probation. He'd never work in law enforcement again. It wasn't enough punishment for what he'd done, but his cooperation had been essential to building the case against Donovan. 3 other officers had taken similar deals. The rest had been fired and were facing their own criminal charges. The Millbrook Police Department had been completely restructured. With most of the old guard gone and new officers brought in from outside, people who hadn't been corrupted by Donovan's system. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they'd returned to the courtroom, the forewoman had read the verdict with a steady voice. Guilty on all counts. There had been gasps, some tears, even a few muted cheers that the judge had quickly silenced. But Maya, sitting in the gallery, had felt a wave of relief and satisfaction wash over her. It was done. Justice had been served. Now, standing before Judge Margaret Harrison for sentencing, Donovan looked smaller somehow. The arrogance was gone. The swagger he'd carried for 15 years had evaporated. He was just a man in an orange jumpsuit, waiting to hear how many years of his life he'd spend in prison. Judge Harrison was in her 60s, a black woman who'd grown up in the civil rights era and had zero tolerance for officials who abused their power. She'd read every page of the trial transcript, reviewed every piece of evidence, and the anger in her eyes was barely contained. "Mr. Donovan," she began, and the use of Mr. instead of Chief was deliberate, a stripping away of the title he'd hidden behind for so long. "I have been on the bench for 23 years. In that time I have sentenced murderers, drug dealers, thieves, and every manner of criminal. But rarely have I encountered someone whose crimes were as fundamentally corrosive to the fabric of society as yours." Donovan stood there, his lawyer beside him saying nothing. "You were given a badge and a gun in the public trust," Judge Harrison continued. "You were given the authority to protect and serve your community. And you perverted that trust completely. You used your position not to uphold the law but to break it, not to protect the vulnerable but to exploit them, not to serve the public but to enrich yourself." She looked down at the sentencing documents in front of her. "The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 20 years. The defense has asked for leniency, citing your years of service and your previously clean record. I have considered both arguments, and I find the defense's request to be insulting to your victims." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Maya leaned forward slightly, waiting. "Your years of service," Judge Harrison said, her voice dripping with contempt, "were years of oppression. Years of violating the constitutional rights of citizens. Years of running a criminal enterprise behind a badge. That's not service. That's betrayal. And as for your clean record, that existed only because you controlled the system that should have been holding you accountable." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I've read the victim impact statements. All 47 of them. I've read about children who grew up afraid of police because of you. About families torn apart by false arrests. About lives derailed by criminal records for crimes that were never committed. About a community that learned to live in fear rather than safety. And I've read about the financial corruption. About how you sold human beings to a private prison for profit." Donovan's head dropped. He couldn't even look at the judge. "The court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison on the civil rights violations, to run consecutively with 10 years for racketeering. consecutively with 5 years for evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. Total sentence: 30 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for the first 20 years. The courtroom erupted. People were crying, hugging each other, some were shouting. The judge had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued once the room quieted. You are ordered to pay restitution to your victims in the amount of $847,000, representing both financial damages and compensation for the harm you caused. Your pension is forfeited. You are permanently barred from any position in law enforcement or public service, and you will remain in custody pending transfer to a federal correctional facility. She looked directly at Donovan, her gaze hard. You destroyed lives, Mr. Donovan. You broke the bond of trust between law enforcement and the community. You dishonored the badge that so many officers wear with pride and integrity, and now you will spend the majority of your remaining years in prison, thinking about the damage you've done. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack and it was over. Donovan was led away, shuffling in his shackles while the courtroom erupted again. Maya watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also sadness that it had come to this, that one man's corruption had caused so much pain. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. News cameras, reporters, and dozens of people from Millbrook who'd come to witness justice being served. Maya stepped out into the sunshine, and immediately microphones were thrust in her direction. Agent Johnson, how do you feel about the sentence? Are you satisfied with the outcome? What message does this send to other corrupt law enforcement officials? Maya held up a hand and the crowd quieted enough for her to speak. Today's sentence sends a clear message that no one is above the law. Not police chiefs, not public officials, no one. Chief Donovan abused his power for years, and today he faced the consequences of those actions. But this isn't just about one man. This is about a system that allowed this corruption to continue for so long. We need better oversight,